A dangerous habit now costs a little more to indulge in Arkansas, but how much difference will it make to the smoker and the larger society? And health professionals note there's a new danger, one that came disguised as a harmless substitute. What's Arkansas to do? But first, in this week's edition, with federal red ink rising rapidly, can a serious slowdown be averted? And with many Arkansas farmers approaching crisis conditions, can they sell their autumn harvest? Questions for the 2nd District Congressman on Arkansas Week, next.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. We are still inhaling. Arkansas remains among the states where tobacco use is highest, not just cigarettes, but tobacco in all forms. And we're paying a price for it in public health, in public dollars. Some changes in public policy became effective this week, but more could be coming in light of new concern and fresh evidence regarding vaping. And we'll get to that in a few moments. First, the economy, Arkansas's, America's. And we're joined by Congressman French Hill, who sits for the 2nd District. Congressman, thanks very much for making time for us.
Steve, thanks for the invitation.
Well, we're in the first days of a new higher round of tariffs, U.S.-China tariffs, and the latest estimates are that it's going to cost consumers, the average consumer, rather more than was initially projected. Perhaps, according to Chase Manhattan or J.P. Morgan Chase, as much as $1,000 per household. Your thoughts?
Well, we've talked before, I'm opposed to the use of tariffs. Tariffs are not good big picture economic policy. They raise costs for consumers, as you note. The threat of tariffs has brought China to the table. And so threatening those tariffs at least got China for the first time in over 2 decades to come to the table and negotiate. The question is, what are we going to get for it? What are we going to see for it? And I think that's why it's important that we bring this to a conclusion as soon as possible, not only for consumers, but for our manufacturers. And I believe sincerely that if the president had gone at the very beginning and gotten the EU and Japan as a partner in this, we might have made more progress in this effort to convert China away from their mercantilistic, very selfish trade policies to more of a world standard. But we didn't. And so we're where we are. And I'm concerned about the longer-term impact of tariffs if they stay in place.
Well, he doesn't seem to be backing away at all of this from his strategy, Congressman. What's next?
Well, he's heard from Congress that they don't agree with his strategy on steel and aluminum tariffs. He didn't agree with his strategy to go it alone necessarily on China, and we need that sense of partnership. I will say that looking at you talked about J.P. Morgan, looking at Goldman Sachs research, there's really been a very modest, if any, impact on GDP in a negative format from the wholesale tariffs that have been put in place. I've been concerned about inflationary aspects of the consumer-based tariffs, and Goldman's thinking if they were fully put on all Chinese imports for 3 years, they might have an 1/8 to 1/4 point increase in the consumer inflation rate, which is how you get to the number you're talking about.
Well, on another trade matter, we've got a lot of Arkansas farmers who are looking at an awful lot of soy, or what they were able to cultivate anyway.
Yep.
Soybeans, cotton, wheat, corn, and they can't move it. What's your message to them?
Well, as I said, that's why I think this trade argument with China needs to be brought to a conclusion as soon as possible. If we go past December this year, we'll have gone into the 3rd farm year with uncertainty about the selling of the soybean crop. And that's why I really urge the president to bring this to a conclusion, even if it's a interim step, so that we can have some certainty in our agricultural markets, which have really suffered the last 3 years primarily due to terrible weather conditions, either on the harvest or the planting end or both.
Well, they're selling a lot less, too, in addition to their problems with Mother Nature. They're selling a lot. The markets are shriveling, and they're concerned, they tell us, they're concerned that their market share may be lost permanently.
I think it's
a part of that market share.
I've talked to soybean farmers in the Morrilton, Arkansas River Valley area. They make that same point during the Carter years, during the Soviet embargo.
Wheat.
That some of those markets never came back to the U.S. They stayed with Canada or Argentina, for example. And so that's why I think it's important that we structurally move this negotiation to a conclusion. Hopefully a positive conclusion for both China and the U.S., but I think it's timely that we need to take that action now.
There is another treaty on the table if it is ratified, and that's the new NAFTA.
Right, USMCA.
Right.
Well, I support that. I worked on the original NAFTA back when I worked for President Bush 41.
Can you get it to a vote?
Well, funny you ask. As we tape this show, Speaker Pelosi is having a conference call this afternoon with her conference, the Democratic conference in the House, to discuss whether or not she can bring up USMCA for a vote in the House. I hope she does. It would be a win for America. It's good for our country. It is an improvement over NAFTA, and it's great particularly for the 100,000 Arkansans that are tied to trade with Canada and Mexico.
How would you grade the president on economic policy? Letter grade.
I'd give him a B+ on regulatory and tax policies. I think there could have been some things better on both, but on trade policy, because I haven't seen the results of this China issue, and I think it should have been multilateral, I give him a C grade there, and I'll tell you why. We have an improved correlate with Korea in the U.S. agreement that I've been told by American businesses in Korea is one of the best. We've renegotiated USMCA, but we've got to get it across the approval in Congress. We have a bilateral arrangement that we've announced a tentative conclusion on with Japan, which is good, something that will make particularly American farmers happy by getting the Japanese deal done. And we've proposed changes with our EU trade arrangement and a prospective one with Great Britain, whether they stay in or get out of the European Union. That's underway. So he's got a lot going, and it could prove where his letter grade moves up. But I'm concerned about where we are on steel and aluminum tariffs and the impact there, and that it hasn't gotten China to move. So I don't give him as high a grade as he might.
Well, if I've done the math correctly very quickly, that's at a minimum, that's a B- that you're giving him.
Well, I'm not rating it
across the board.
Yeah, no, I think, I'd say that's fair. I think the most important trade matter before the U.S. and our allies, both in Europe and in Asia, is getting a good deal with China and changing China's protectionism and mercantilistic trade policies that they've had now in place for 2 decades. And with the change in the Chinese regime that's now hostile economically and militarily to the region in South China Sea and across the world, it's a different China than Deng Xiaoping of the 80s.
In advocating the 17 tax bill, it was argued by many in your call, and certainly by the administration itself, that it would essentially eliminate the deficit, or that the cuts would pay for themselves. It looks as though we're going to hit $1 trillion deficit a lot sooner than was projected. Do you have any regrets about voting for it?
I don't have regrets for voting for it because this has been a bipartisan objective of tax policy for 30 years to eliminate the double taxation on income earned abroad by American business. As we've become a more international country with more international business, that was penalizing American production here and penalizing the ability to invest in the U.S. So I think that was at the heart of the bill. I think the reforms on the personal side, up and down the spectrum, produced a better outcome for most taxpayers in Arkansas, got a better tax outcome. The issue is, did it help the economy grow above trend line? And in my view, it did. We had 10 years at 1.8% growth after a recession in 08 and 09 that should have seen 3 and 4% growth coming out of that bottom growth period. Well, we just didn't sustain that. So we have record jobs created. We have a faster growing economy above trend line, and I think that's contributed mightily. The big structural challenge to our current year budget deficit and out year budget deficit is our mandatory spending programs, which are 72% of the federal budget now.
Well, we're seeing a slowdown, though, are we not? Both in overall GDP. The latest numbers aren't terribly encouraging in terms of corporate investment and manufacturing output and retail, consumer spending being so important. The latest numbers that I have seen, it's down 9%. Well, you see storm clouds here?
I see mixed data right now, and I think that's what the Federal Reserve sees. I don't see a trend, everything on green in terms of economic indicators, but I don't see storm clouds per se. Real income is up for the first time in years for individual households. We have the strong, robust hiring and strong job performance across the country. And, you know, business investment's been on par through 2018. I mean, it's been above its trend line. I think the tax bill helped that. So I don't see storm clouds per se, but when you've hit 11 years of an economic expansion, you can't just keep assuming that you're going to get robust growth.
Well, you don't accept the sugar high argument that's so often tossed out regarding, well, the impact of the 17 tax bill.
You know, I don't actually. I think that the structural change was important, and I think you got some short-term economic impact in the year of 2018 early on. You had salaries increased, you had special bonuses, you had a certain amount of investment made early in the year. But I don't view that as as you say, as a sugar high that in any way sort of skewed numbers. I think the budget deficit long term and reforming mandatory spending is a key economic concern I have. And then getting the country back on track in global trade, I think, is very important, and we've talked about that.
The smart money seems to, no pun intended, seems to be that there'll be that the Fed will act again within a fairly short time.
Yes, the markets seem to indicate a modest cut, but the Fed board is clearly split by this, and that's why I think the economic indicators we talked about are not compelling one way or the other. You have the UK weakening, the EU weakening, and China itself, as you know, is weakening. So the thought is, well,
pound is sinking like a stone.
If the world is going to reduce, then America should as well. And I think that's what split the Board of Governors. But I do agree that the markets and conventional wisdom of people watching the central bank anticipate another cut in the short run, perhaps at the September meeting.
And I can't resist asking, do you regard the Fed as the enemy? Or the chairman, Mr. Powell, as the enemy?
I don't. I think that presidents have always battled Fed chairs verbally and behind the scenes, even if they appointed them. I think of Nixon's admonitions to Arthur Burns about the incompetence of his predecessor, or Jimmy Carter trying to fire Miller and hire Paul Volcker, or the famous scene as told in Paul Volcker's book of Jim Baker sitting him down in the Oval Office with President Reagan comfortably sitting in the chair,
ordering him to,
and Jimmy Baker saying the president is telling you no rate increases in 1984. So this is not a new thing, but I don't believe we should be, I don't think the president should be assailing the Fed chair on Twitter. I don't think that's constructive. But I will say it is very much in keeping with past presidents' feeling for their Fed chairman.
And finally, this on a different subject. Walmart announced today, and by the way, this is November the 3rd, or excuse me, September 3rd, when our schedules compel us to tape on this day. Earlier on September 3rd, Walmart announced, the world's largest corporation based here in Arkansas, announced that it is further constricting its sales of firearms. I think it's eliminating some grades of ammunition and otherwise restricting sales, perhaps by age, and I don't have the data in front of me. And it also makes no bones about it. It acknowledged this is a response to the latest mass shootings.
Right.
Will Congress respond?
Well, I think Congress is going to debate how to strengthen background checks. What are the gaps in the background check system? In this most recent horrible incident out in Midland, Odessa, in the Charleston shooting, in the Sutherland Springs shooting, at Dayton, each instance there was a failure of the background check system to facilitate someone acquiring a firearm that should not have been able to, either due to their dishonorable discharge or a felony conviction. And I'm very supportive of strengthening the robustness of that to make sure that we get people who should not have a lethal weapon the ability to buy it through the background check system. There are a number of bills that would do that, and I'm going to be looking at those, and I have no doubt that that'll be a vigorous conversation when Congress reconvenes.
Well, Congress may debate, but it has rarely acted in this regard, and now the administration has seemed to throw cold water on it from the White House anyway. So will Congress do more than debate?
I think it's conceivable, but I think, remember, you've got to get something through both houses of Congress, and I think that needs to be bipartisan and consensus, and it can't be something that doesn't reach that consensus. So I think that those conversations will be held. But remember, the real issue is how do we get people who should not have a firearm purchased, number one, and number two, how do we make sure that people in our society get the care that they need through the mental health system, something I've worked on since I've been in Congress. Both those things are frustrating to people across the country.
Representative French Hill, we're out of time.
Thank you
for
much,
yours.
Steve. Thanks.
And please come back soon.
We'll do it.
And stay tuned, please, to see what state agencies and commission meetings are coming up on the Arkansas Citizens Access Network, ARCAN. And we'll be right back. And we're back. A pair of perils, one of them older than the Republic, the second a comparatively new innovation. Tobacco in every form, vaping in various flavors. The price of the former rose a bit in recent days. Concern is rising about the latter. We're joined now by Dr. Joe Thompson, president of the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement. Doctor, thanks again for coming aboard. Let's start with tobacco. General Assembly is kind of a byproduct, anyway, of some legislation that was intended to raise money anyway, and will do so through higher tobacco prices, cigarette prices at least. It's effective this past week.
Small tax increase went into effect this week to help support part of the needs for the National Cancer Institute at UAMS. A more important part, I think, of that legislation was raising the purchase age both for tobacco products and for e-cigarettes to 21 years of age now in the state.
Well, it's graduated, though. It
is graduated. If you're 19 before the end of this year, you can continue to purchase, but ultimately we'll be at 21 as the purchase threshold to buy either cigarettes or e-cigarettes.
Well, that 2-3 year difference, is that critical in your estimation?
You know, I would have rather it gone to 21 right off the bat, but obviously we have individuals that have started smoking, unfortunately become addicted to nicotine, and therefore need to quit. I would highly recommend, but may not be able to be legally prohibited from buying. So this was a compromise, but I think it was an important step that the legislature and the governor took.
Why the age differential here,
Sure.
that age factor component?
We increasingly know that teenagers' brains are still forming. We know that nicotine is as addictive as cocaine. We raise the age from 16 to 18 and 18 now to 21 to be able to delay the initiation of nicotine exposure. There are very few people at age 25 that had never smoked before that start smoking. Most of your lifelong smokers, if you ask them, they started at 14, 15, 16 years of age, some 17, 18. This will get it up to where hopefully we'll avoid the next generation from having a nicotine addiction if we take certain steps on e-cigarettes.
The implications for the public treasury through public health programs and public and private insurance carriers is significant. We do hear various estimates of the impact, the economic impact. What's yours?
Well,
is there an accurate way to?
Yes, for tobacco alone, in the last legislative task force on taxation, a number was thrown out of somewhere around $200 million in cost to Medicaid for tobacco. Our team back at the center heard that. We said, Medicaid's now a $7 billion a year program. $200 million doesn't seem like the right number. So we went back and we actually did some data crunching with the all-payer claims database, and we think a very conservative estimate just for people between 30 and 65 years of age. So not counting pregnancy, not counting youth with asthma, prematurity, older folks in nursing homes that Medicaid pays for. A very conservative estimate for 30 to 65 year olds is close to $700 million a year.
Now, that's, I assume, coronary, pulmonary, other ailments.
Tobacco is the #1 killer in our state. The one that it's most closely associated with is obviously lung cancer, but it directly contributes to cardiovascular disease, heart disease, kidney disease, stroke. It contributes to other lungs disease, COPD, emphysema, and a number of cancers other than lung cancer that are associated with the metabolites of tobacco as it moves through your body.
Measuring Arkansas against other states, and if my information is correct, the South is where tobacco consumption remains the highest. Have we made any progress in the last decade in terms of reducing Arkansas' share of that tobacco market?
We do see a step down in tobacco use, mainly cigarettes, in our population. Now about 1 in 5 Arkansans use tobacco in some way. You mentioned the South. The South is a high user because tobacco companies targeted low-income individuals, communities of color, and low educational level folks, and unfortunately we have a majority of those. If you go to higher income, more educated folks, the smoking rates are much lower. So we need to protect those communities from the advertising effects of tobacco.
So much for tobacco. The tobacco alternative that was said to be safer, e-cigarettes, vaping.
E-cigarettes, I would declare as an epidemic among our high school students at this point in time. I'll come back to what is being advertised in a moment, but parents, teachers, superintendents are up in arms about the penetration of our schools down to as low as 6th grade by electronic cigarettes just over the past 3 or 4 years. This is an example of one that's a commonly purchased electronic cigarette that our youth are using. It looks like a USB port that you stick into.
Excuse me,
sure.
I'm going to suggest that the camera move in close so you can get a...
It looks like a USB port that you would put into your computer. The Juul pod itself that contains a whole pack of cigarettes worth of nicotine is here in the Juul pod. You charge this up, you stick this in, and you've now got an electronic cigarette that's worth a whole pack of cigarettes that some of our youth are consuming within 20 minutes.
Which contain, and at what price? I mean,
the Juul pods, a pack of Juul pods is about $15. That's 4 Juul pods, so 4 packs of cigarettes. We do not tax them at all at the present time other than sales tax. And there's some common kind of jokes around the school grounds of why do we still have commodes in the Juul room?
Well, I guess it's not really a laughing matter, though.
It's not a laughing matter. You know, we know today 44% nationwide of high school seniors have tried e-cigarettes in the past. 20% of high school seniors in Arkansas are daily users, and of those, 20% have used e-cigarettes this month, and 28% are daily users.
Well, is that still, though, not better than tar, nicotine, formaldehyde, all the other chemicals that a conventional cigarette?
So in our youth, our efforts to restrict advertising, to eliminate Joe Camel, to actually have counter efforts against tobacco companies, we've seen a more rapid drop in tobacco use while we've seen this rapid increase in e-cigarette use. I would say, let me move, if you're a 55, 60-year-old, 3-pack-a-day smoker, this may be a more healthy option. But what I would encourage you to do is either with a counselor or at least somebody that's going to hold you accountable, move from your 3 packs a day and systematically reduce the amount of nicotine so that you're weaning yourself from that addiction, not just switching to another product that we know little about the long-term health consequences of.
Well, what little we do know seems to suggest there's some new CDC, breaking news if you will, CDC or FDA intelligence. A lot of people are getting pretty sick, and at least at this time we're doing this interview, at least one death that's suspected.
We've actually had a second added from e-cigarettes in the last 24 hours nationwide. There are about 200 individuals that the CDC is investigating, young people, most of whom have reported recent e-cigarette use, lung illnesses that are very atypical. I think the evidence is growing that these have a harmful effect. The effort to identify what that is specifically is going to take some time. I think the important thing is your lungs are some of the most sensitive organs in your body. And if you think about inflammation and what's rational without evidence yet, you've got an air sac and you've got a blood vessel and you've got a single cell where oxygen's going in and carbon dioxide's going out. If you chemically irritate that cell, it's going to scar and you're going to have an inflammatory reaction that are causing these lung illnesses.
What do we know about what is in some? There's a huge problem, I understand, in that some consumers are buying off the street or as opposed to from, quote, reputable agency or establishment.
So we need to split the e-cigarettes like this that were prepackaged that do have some quality control at the company from the e-cigarette liquids that are being purchased and mixed. The nicotine products are fairly clean, but what it gets mixed with, the last legislative session eliminated the Tobacco Control Board's oversight of what it's being mixed with. So you can mix it in your bathtub, take it to the vape shop, and sell it as a new concoction for inhalation.
All right, we're going to take a pause just for a second and conclude our over-the-air broadcast, but we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Thompson in just a minute on our website, so please, we would suggest you go to aetn.org, and we'll resume the conversation in just a second. Beginning Friday, October 4th, Arkansas Week will be moving to a new time, 7:30 p.m., so you'll want to be mindful of that. Thank you for joining us on our over-the-air edition, and again, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Thompson in just a minute on the web. Next time.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.